Number 38, page 178 at the bottom of the page, Othniel, who is the first judge. And that is the character sheet. There are a few spare sheets on the information corner if you need one. This man was the first of the judges. The time period of the judges of Israel ran from the death of Joshua's generation through the time of Samuel, roughly 1380 BC to about 1050 BC. Othniel means force of God or line of God, and the Hebrew pronunciation is Othniel. So they don't have a TH sound there like we do, Othniel. So I'm going to read for us out of Joshua chapter 15, and you can just listen or you can follow along in your own Bible, starting at verse 13 and going through verse 19. This is Joshua chapter 15. Now he gave to Caleb the son of Jephunneh a portion among the sons of Judah, according to the command of the Lord to Joshua, namely Kiriath Arba, Arba being the father of Anak, that is Hebron. Caleb drove out from the three sons of Anak, Shishai and Ahiman and Talmai, the children of Anak. Then he went up from there against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sepher. And Caleb said, the one who attacks Kiriath Sepher and captures it, I will give him Achsah, my daughter, as a wife. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, captured it, so he gave him Achsah, his daughter, as a wife. It came about that when she came to him, she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. So she alighted from the donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? Then she said, give me a blessing, since you have given me the land of the Negev. Give me also the springs of water. So he gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. So on our question sheet for tonight, question number 1. During the conquest of Canaan, the aged but still energetic Caleb asked the leader of Israel, Joshua, for a special inheritance of land, the giant-infested hill country, specifically the city of Hebron, also called Kiriath Arba, named after the greatest giant. He drove out the three sons of Anak from Hebron, then moved on to the city of Debir, also called Kiriath Sepher, which means book city. Incidentally, Kiriath Sepher, a Canaanite city, was probably renowned because there was a lot of literary activity there. Might have been a library, might have been people who were doing writing, maybe an archive of records. Canaanites, for a long time, were assumed to be very backward people. But in fact, the archaeological evidence is they were actually quite advanced. They had music, they had literature, they had various art forms. So this was a city that was renowned for its books. What challenge and reward did Caleb set? From verse 16, the one who attacks Kiriath Sepher and captures it, I will give him Achsah, my daughter, as a wife. It seems plausible that Achsah was born in Caleb's old age. Perhaps his wife had died and he had remarried. Number 2, who completed this challenge? From verse 17, Othniel, who is Caleb's nephew. It's possible that Kenaz, Othniel's father, was the second husband of Caleb's mother, since Caleb's father's name is Jephunneh. It's also possible that Othniel was Caleb's great-nephew instead of his nephew, since in Hebrew father sometimes means ancestor. Number 3, what did Othniel and Achsah ask for from Caleb? From verse 19, the springs of water. So why is that recorded? Why is that something that's written down here in the text? The springs of water. Well, in those days, if you had land, but you didn't have any water, what are you going to do? So the water rights, having a spring, would be a really big deal. If you're going to do any planting and any agriculture or raise any animals, you got to have water. And so Achsah persuades her husband, let's go together and ask my dad for the springs. And in fact, they do that, and he gives them the springs. And so they inherit not only a nice field, nice piece of property, but also the water rights. Number 4, the people of Israel failed to complete the conquest that God had commanded in Judges 1. Therefore, God told them that he would not drive out the wicked nations before them, but let them be a thorn in Israel's side and a snare. What happened after righteous Joshua and his generation died? about 25 years later. In verse 10, there arose another generation after them who did not know Yahweh, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. So the generation coming up behind Joshua and that generation, probably the blame is largely to be laid at the parents. In other words, Joshua's generation, they saw the hand of God. They're the ones who went into Canaan. They conquered the territories and the cities, but they failed to pass on to their children. It is critical, it is absolutely essential that you know God and you love God and you obey his commandments. So this new generation, they don't really know Yahweh, and they don't really understand how powerful God is. They don't really get it, that the most important thing in life is to love him and serve him. Number 5, what did this generation of Israelites do? They did evil in the sight of Yahweh. They forsook Yahweh. What does it mean to forsake? Turn your back on. They walked away. They forsook Yahweh and followed other gods. These would be pagan gods, including Baal or Baal, a Canaanite god of fertility, rain, and lightning, and other things. And the Ashtaroth, these are goddesses of fertility, consorts to Baal. Number 6, what did the Lord do? The anger of Yahweh burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of plunderers. What's a plunderer? Yeah, pirates. They're corsairs. They now this is land and not sea, but they come in and they raid your crops. They raid your herds. If you get in their way, they'll kill you. They'll burn your house down, and they'll just take anything of value. And so these are various kinds of, the Midianites, for example, were camel raiders. They rode camels, and they would ride at high speed into a village, knock down anybody that got in their way, and take anything of value and ride off into the desert. And so this is, sounds almost like Robin Hood in the British Isles, the days of thieves and robbers and plunderers. That's what this is. And so the Lord gave them into the hands of plunderers and enemies. Number 7, the author of Judges then outlines a cycle. Summarize it. So what kind of a cycle does this look like? Something like Israel sins, and what is the main sin in the book of Judges? Idolatry. So they're turning to other gods. They're forsaking Yahweh. They're worshiping Baal or these other pagan deities. And so God says, hey, we made a covenant. You serve me, you love me, I protect you, I watch over you, I give you prosperity. You're not following the covenant. And so now I'm going to give you what I told you I would give you, which is what? War, oppression, slavery, the Philistines, or the Midianites, or the Amalekites, or these other ites. They're gonna either be like raiders, plunderers, or they're gonna come in and take over the land. And then you are their slaves. And eventually, after years and years and years of the Israelites groaning, kind of like they did in Egypt. They're groaning, and they work hard at planting and taking care of their fields and harvesting the crops. And then these enemies come in and take their food. After years and years of this kind of thing, what do the Israelites do? They cry out to the Lord, say, oh Lord, this is so miserable. We're in dire straits here. This is horrible. We're living like slaves. Please rescue us. And so God responds to those prayers by doing what? Sending a judge, sending a deliverer. And so that's what the whole book of Judges is about. These deliverers or these judges, they usually start out as a military leader. They come in and they say, let's everybody rally. We're going to get rid of these people who are oppressing us and stealing our food and killing us. So everybody gather together. And then the people do that. They respond to the leadership of a judge or a deliverer, and he leads them into battle, and they kick the Philistines out, or the Amalekites, or whomever, and then there's a period of peace. And then what happens? It starts all over again. They go back to worshiping other gods, and then they get enslaved, and then they cry out to God, and this is the cycle that happens several times in the book of Judges, and Othniel is the first one. So he's, he was either alive or born shortly after Joshua's generation. And now he's in the period of the Judges, and he's the first one to say, everybody gather together, we're going to do something about this. So now, number 8, who conquered Israel? What a name. If anybody can say that, you get $5. Cushan Rishathaim. Yeah, right. Who is the king of Mesopotamia. Literally, in Hebrew, that is twice wicked Cushan. Now, I'm guessing that that's probably not what his mommy and daddy named him. That's probably not, his given name. That would be what the Hebrews called him. And so, that's their name for him, probably not his own name. So, number 9, what did Israel do after 8 years of subjection under this king from Mesopotamia? They cried to the Lord. So they prayed, they repented, they turned to God and said, we need your help. We are so miserable here. And number 10, what did God do in response to this? He raised up a deliverer for them, and his name was Othniel. Number 11, look up Mesopotamia. Is it near or far from Israel? It's far away. It's a long ways away. Depending on how you measure it, it could be as little as 700 miles and as much as 1,000 miles from Palestine, from Canaan. And so this is a long ways away. The Hebrew phrase for Mesopotamia is Aram Naharaim, or highland of two rivers. Abraham's servant traveled to that area to find a bride for Isaac in Genesis 24. Number 12, what does this imply about the power and reach of doubly wicked King Cushan? So, circling the correct adjective, he was very powerful and had the reach to control large amounts of territory. If he is, controlling an area that is 700-800 miles from his homeland, he is a powerful king. He is a guy who has broad reach. So, number 13, who came upon Othniel? The Spirit of the Lord. So the Holy Spirit came upon Othniel. And remember that in the Old Testament, we do find this kind of record. It doesn't usually say things like the Spirit of the Lord indwelt, like we find in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it's much more like the Spirit of the Lord came upon somebody, and that's what this is here. And so, number 14, how could Othniel possibly win a war against a mighty king? Verse 10, the Lord gave Cushan Rishathaim into Othniel's hand so that he prevailed. What does prevail mean? He won. He won the battle. So Othniel, who is leading a band of Israelites, we don't know how many, but in the big picture of the Middle East, Mesopotamia is a major power broker. They're a big gun. And Canaan, and especially the Israelites, that's a little teeny tiny blip. So, this kind of a battle for a little teeny tiny entity in Canaan to overthrow, to win against a big player, that is really, really unusual. That doesn't happen. But that is what happened. So we find here that the Lord is the one who oversaw, who took over in Othniel's case, and he's the one who gave the victory. Number 15, Othniel is also noted as judging Israel. This may refer simply to his military leadership, but it may also mean that he served in a local judicial or leadership role for the rest of his life. after his military leadership, which was apparently 40 years. Did Israel obey God after Othniel's death? No. Back to the cycle. So, you'd like to think that Othniel was able to start a revival and people hung with it and stuck with it, but that's not true. The people went back to their old ways. So here's a corollary passage. This is kind of a lesson. And this is not specifically talking about Othniel, but there is a principle here out of Zechariah chapter 4. This is hundreds and hundreds of years later, and God is working with the exiles who've returned from Babylon to Israel. So question number 16, this passage out of Zechariah chapter 4, in fact, you know what, let's read it. Let's instead of just talking about it, let's read it. So Zechariah is the next to the last book of the Old Testament. If you get to Malachi, you're one book too far. Zechariah chapter 4. And in that passage, we're going to read the first 7 verses. Zechariah 4:1. Then the angel who was speaking with me returned and roused me as a man who is awakened from a sleep. He said to me, "What do you see?" And I said, "I see, and behold, a lampstand, all of gold, with its bowl on the top of it, and its 7 lamps on it with 7 spouts, belonging to each of the lamps which are on the top of it. Also 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side of the bowl and the other on its left side." Then I said to the angel who was speaking with me, saying, "What are these, my Lord?" So the angel who was speaking with me answered and said to me, "Do you not know what these are?" And I said, "No, my Lord." Then he said to me, "This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel." Zerubbabel, by the way, is the governor of the city of Jerusalem at this time. This is what he says, "Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. What are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you will become a plain, and he will bring forth the top stone with shouts of grace, grace to it." So there's a vision that Zechariah has, and the vision is of a lampstand, a menorah with 7 bowls, wicks in them, but these are not the normal lamps that you'd find in the Temple of Jerusalem or in a Jewish household, because they all have have spouts going to each of these bowls that has a wick burning in it, and the spouts are connected to 2 trees. And the trees are olive trees, and the picture is these lamps are getting infused with olive oil directly from the trees. And they're never going to go out because the oil is always being supplied. And the lesson is, in the days of Zechariah, like in the days of Othniel, Israel is this little teeny tiny thing surrounded by gigantic empires. In the days of Zechariah and Zerubbabel, it's the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire has taken over the known world. From India to Greece, they have taken over everything. And Israel is this little teeny tiny blip. And people are talking about rebuilding the temple and restarting the worship of God in Jerusalem. And people are saying, "We can't do that. That's too much. We don't have any power. We don't have any strength." And so God is using Zechariah the prophet to say to them, you know what? It's not by might and it's not by power. It's by the Spirit of God. What an encouragement that is. We look around and we see huge entities and corporations and nations and movements and even religious trends that are way, way, way bigger than we are. They're way richer than we are. They have more people. They have more political clout. But we still stand by what God told Zechariah. It's not by might and it's not by power. It's by the Spirit of God. And so where the Spirit of God works in souls and hearts, that's where there's going to be real change and real glory being brought to God. So in Othniel's case, if you were to say to the king of Mesopotamia back in Judges, Have you ever heard of a guy named Othniel, Lion of God? Who? Who's that again? Well, he's a Hebrew. He lives over there on the Mediterranean coast. Oh yeah, I own that territory. That's mine. Did you know that Othniel is going to kill you in battle? Yeah, right, sure. But he did. And it wasn't because Othniel is a great warrior. It's because God was engineering the whole thing. So the great lesson from Othniel's story would be what? Nothing is impossible with God. Couldn't put it better myself. Nothing is impossible with God. Where God is at work, things are going to happen, and it doesn't matter who stands up against it. It doesn't matter who says, I can shut this down, or I can cause this to stop. If God is in it, it's going to succeed. Amen. Any other comments or thoughts? Take your prayer bulletins, please.